So the things I talk about historical figures, so those things too, because I learn a lot. Before I talk about an historical figure, I read about the person's history, then I now think of how to talk about it. So, top 10 historical figures I talked about 2025. Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, and with the riches he got, before he died, he talked about his legacy, and then he wrote a will that most of his fortunes, he had over 100 companies in more than 20 countries, and has 355 patents to his name, so he has vast fortunes, but instead of leaving it to he was not married, he had no child, instead of leaving it to his family members, he decided to write a will where he bequeathed the bulk of it to giving awards to people who excel in physics, in chemistry, physiology, or medicine, in literature, peace. Later, after his death, economics was added. The next historical figure that I talked about, not in chronological order now, I talked about Edward Jenner, a country surgeon who was interested. He noticed the process of variolation, and then he now brought about vaccination. So the history of vaccination, the history of antivaxxers and all that is a rich history. I talked about Edward Jenner. Then I talked about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is one who is often remembered as a lady who sat down when she was asked to stand up, in the US civil rights fight, But her history is not just that. Rosa Parks grew up under the Jim Crow laws, grew up in the South, where they were the KKK. When she was young, when she was staying in the grandfather's plantation, they used to go to bed dressed, because they were expecting that the KKK could come, they could try to burn their house. So they had to sleep dressed so that in case there's any attack, they can quickly run away. And there were times where she has to stay up late with the grandfather. The grandfather used to sleep in a chair with his gun by his side in case of there's any attack. So she saw all that, and she was an active member of the NWCP, and then she was the secretary of the National Association for Colored People. She was the secretary in Alabama. When she was already active in the civil rights movement. The husband was active in the civil rights movement. So by the time that incident occurred in the bus, she was quite active, and then she was sitting in the back. The bus was arranged that those in front, the seats in the front are for whites, the seats at the back are for blacks or colored people. So she was sitting at the back, but sitting close to the front row of the back rows for black people. And so the rule is that if the front seats for whites, if they are filled up and there's another white person, the whites, and then we are not allowed to mix up with whites, so the black people have to stand up. So she was asked, the row she was sitting, she was asked to stand up. Other people stood up, but she refused to stand up, and then she was arrested. Then when some people say that, oh, she sat down because she was tired, she said she didn't refuse to stand up because she was tired. Rather, she was trying to sit down to express her stance against the injustices of segregation, the injustices of the Jim Crow laws, and all that. And because of that act she took, she was arrested, and then that galvanized the civil rights movement. There was a young pastor then, name of Martin Luther King Jr. He was just a young pastor in a church in that area. So when they heard that Rosa Parks was arrested, that served as a stimulus for them to organize, and they now organize a boycott of buses, where blacks said that blacks were the majority of those that used to take buses in that place in Alabama. So when the blacks now said we are not going to be entering buses, and they did it for a long time, they did it for more than a year, where they boycotted those buses, and that led to the cases being taken up, and the Supreme Court now saying that that segregation in buses was unlawful, was unconstitutional. So interesting story of Rosa Parks. I'll talk about the matriarch Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. People often remember her as the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria, but she's not only. That is just an aside. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, matriarch, she led the Abeokuta women, and they now formed. She formed a club that now became an association. She organized market women, and they were able to fight against harsh policies of the colonial masters. She was able to fight with the collaborators of colonial masters. They did sit in, and she helped to organize. And we were among those that fought for the end of colonial rule. And after Nigeria gained independence, it continued. And she is the mother of Fela Kuti, the late Fela Kuti. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti is the mother. She's the mother that was upstairs when soldiers, invaded the Kalakuta Republic, and she was thrown from a story building down. She suffered injuries, and later she succumbed to those injuries she suffered. So Funmilayo Ransome Kuti is not just known. It's not just that she drove the first car. She was one of the founding organizers, the civil rights movements in Nigeria, and fought against colonial rule, not only in Nigeria, in other African countries. I also talk about Margaret Ekpo. In that same light, I talk about Aja Gambo Sawaba in the north. So Funmilayo Ransome Kuti in the west, Margaret Ekpo, Margaret Ekpo was inspired by what Funmilayo Ransome Kuti did in the west. She had her own in the southeast, in the east. Then you have Aja Gambo Sawaba in the north, who fought for more liberties for women, and she was very active. She was arrested 16 times. So historical figures I talked about Rupert Murdoch, who is the owner of the first conglomerate. I talked about how Rupert Murdoch, along with the next person I talked about, Margaret Thatcher. How Rupert Murdoch and Margaret Thatcher were able to fight unions. Then Rupert Murdoch supported Margaret Thatcher before she emerged as Prime Minister of the UK. And as Prime Minister, she also supported her agenda. And he owned the major newspapers in the UK, and with that influence, he was able to push to support her policies. The Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. When I was talking about unions, I talked about Margaret Thatcher, how she was able to fight against mine union. Rupert Murdoch fought against printing unions. Margaret Thatcher fought against coal mines, which was once the cornerstone of the UK economy. Later, the UK is now a more service-driven economy. Then I also talked about the Aba Women Riot of 1929. The Aba Women Riot is 1929 When the colonial masters were trying to do a census of both men and women, and what they own, and the women felt that this was just a ploy by the colonial masters to now start taxing women. Then the taxes was for only men, so but the colonial masters, they realized that women too were industrious and making money. The women used to support their husbands to pay the tax. But when they started to do a census to count everybody, the women saw it as a ploy for them to be taxed as well. And then they rioted, led by several women and different groups. Became known as the Aba Women Riot, that went on. They do sit-ins, and then the colonial masters responded with overwhelming force. But then the fight by the Aba Women Riot now laid the groundwork for subsequent movements, anti-colonial movements, with Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti in the west, Margaret Ekpo in the east. They all got inspiration that decades later, they were able to get inspired by what the Aba Women Riot did. Then I also talked about late High Chief Raymond Dokpesi, of the AIT, of Real Power, and I tried to link what Rupert Murdoch did. Rupert Murdoch is an Australian. I was able to conquer printing and newspaper in Australia, extended to other New Zealand, then get to UK, bought News of the World, The Sun, and then he now went to America, got American citizenship. I was able to buy newspapers and buy televisions, the same pattern we saw. High Chief Raymond Dokpesi, who was a marine engineer, was sent abroad to study marine engineering. The person that sent him abroad is Bamaga Tuku, So, and Bamaga Tuku was first head of the Nigerian Ports Authorities. It was then that he sent High Chief Raymond Dokpesi then to study marine engineering. He came back, worked for some time under Nigerian Ports Authority. Then Bamaga Tuku became interested in politics, and so that's how Raymond Dokpesi got involved in politics. When Bamaga Tuku won briefly, as governor, Raymond Dokpesi was his chief of staff, even though he's from Bamaga Tuku was in the north. Raymond Dokpesi is from Edo State, from Vendel, Edo State, and then, later somebody who did marine engineering got into politics. He wasn't a journalist, but then when Babangida liberalized the broadcasting sector, he was able to get license and set up one of the first privately owned radio station, Real Power, and then later he got AIT. Sadly, he passed away in May 29th, same day that President Tinubu was sworn in 2023. I think from an incident or so in his house. So High Chief Raymond Dokpesi understood media, and the same way that Tinubu owns TVC News and The Nation, and owns other radio stations, Wazobia FM and all that. The same pattern too, that people who want to influence, the one way to influence things. Look at Rupert Murdoch with his influence. Rupert Murdoch was into printing newspapers. Well, that influence was able to support Margaret Thatcher. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, he now used that connection and influence to expand his media empire in the UK. And Rupert Murdoch did the same thing in the US. It was with the influence of Fox News and others that we were able to get Donald Trump first elected in 2016. So you can see that people use media. If you can control the media, you can exert a lot of power and influence. And people have understood that for decades. And the top person on top to do that is Rupert Murdoch. And then we have High Chief Raymond Dokpesi doing it in Nigeria. then Bola Tinubu, who has also been able to use the media effectively. So those are top 10. So the next is I'll talk about key events that happened in 2025.